Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, a community for the spiritually awakened. We are so glad and grateful that you have been able to join us this week. We have an exciting and much beloved author joining us. We have Anodea Judith here, who is the author and co-author of 8 books on various aspects of healing, psychology, spirituality, social change, and yoga. She is best known for her book, Wheels of Life, which has sold more than 250,000 copies in the United States and has been translated in 24 languages. She holds master's and doctoral degrees in psychology and human health and is a 500-hour registered yoga teacher with lifelong studies in psychology, mythology, sociology, history, systems theory, and mystic spirituality. We are so grateful to have Ms. Judith here to talk about her newest book, Charge and the Energy Body. Welcome so much to our show. We are just very big fans.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here. All charged up.
All charged up, that's right. Well, we wanted to start off, I don't want to, I was thinking about this interview all day and I thought, I don't want to start off by saying, Miss Judith, how did you come to study the chakras? Because that's kind of like asking Oprah Winfrey, how did you get into talk shows? But if you could just give listeners just an overview of what drew you. You have this doctorate, you have this very psychological, research studied, formal traditional training, and now you are this world-renowned teacher of energy and the chakra systems. Could you just briefly tell our listeners how you transitioned into that through your journey?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and I do get it a lot. How did I find my way to this from, the so-called straight world? And the fact is, it was the other way around for me, that I started out in the spiritual world. I started out, way out on the fringes, and then I realized if I was ever going to be taken seriously, I had to go back to graduate school and do all the formal training. But I was into the chakras long before I did that. In fact, I had already written Wheels of Life before I completed my bachelor's. And I used it as part of my application to get into my master's degree. And then my dissertation, I used my book, Eastern Body, Western Mind. So I actually went from my spiritual studies to the straight studies and then combined them both.
Were you raised in a spiritually aware home?
Well, yes and no. It was sort of classic, American Christian. My mother was a very spiritual woman who believed that love was the center of everything, to which I agree. But there wasn't anything in my family about yoga or meditation or mysticism or any of the things that I've come to embrace since then. I found my way to all of that when I was in college as an undergraduate, very frustrated with what I was studying in psychology. So actually I started there, then I went off to my explorations, then I went back to graduate school and got my master's and PhD.
Wow, that's a very fascinating journey. It almost feels like you came home when you found this path, like it was always there for you, waiting for you to discover it.
It was always there for me. And when I first discovered the word chakras, it was like a shot of energy went through my body, and I knew that I had discovered a very vital key to humanity's future.
Well, your book, Wheels of Life, I wish we were on video so I could show you my battered, worn, highlighted, dog-eared copy. It's still selling even better almost now than it did in the 80s. Do you always get people coming up to you and talking to you about that book?
Yeah, that's the one that people know the best. And it came out in 1987, so it's 31 years old now. And it still is the bestseller, and people say that, they got it in their healing program or their yoga teacher training program, or people tell me they came across the book in a wide variety of ways. They go to a hotel room and somebody had left it there. Or
if you could start us off by talking about what charge and discharge is in the body, and why you call it charge rather than energy or prana, and how it works in the body in your mind, the way you wrote it. Because I love the way you talked about the way energy and charge gets trapped in our body.
Okay, well, that's several topics right there. Let's just start off with what charge is.
Yeah.
So, charge is, for me, a word that means the same thing as prana. That's what yogis talk about. Chi, that's what they talk about in martial arts. Freud called it libido. Wilhelm Reich called it orgone energy. Star Wars calls it the force. A lot of people just call it energy. The reason I use the word charge is it's something that we can all relate to, as in you've got a charge about something. And, somebody may still have a big charge on their ex-husband, for example. Well, you don't say you have a lot of prana on that subject. It doesn't quite make sense. But even children can relate to it. Oh, you're all charged up. You're excited. You're going on vacation, or it's going to be Christmas. We know what it is to have a charge on something. And then I think the letters stand for consciousness having a really genuine experience. Because when we have a full charge going through our body, when we're excited, or we're scared, or we're sexually aroused, or we're happy or angry, we know it. We're not wondering what the meaning of life is in those moments. We know that we've got a charge going. We know we're having a very genuine experience. And I think it's something we can all relate to. So I like the mundane term of charge.
I do too, because like you said, it's already in our vernacular. I particularly like the acronym you have connected with it. I think it'll help people to remember it and have that conscious awareness of when charge is going through their body. Now, how do you define charge and discharge?
Well, we're charging and discharging all day long through natural activities. Some of them are very quick, like inhaling and exhaling. Every time you take breath in, you're pulling energy in from outside to the inside, and the oxygen is, going through your bloodstream and charging you up. And every time you exhale, you're discharging a little bit. So on one level, that happens every few seconds. On another level, it's, waking up in the morning and then working all day and putting energy out and being tired at night and going to sleep and recharging your batteries and then getting up and doing it again the next day. So that's another charge-discharge cycle. Then there are, we might be on a work burn for a while. We're working on a big project and you're working overtime for several weeks, and that's a big discharge. And then you wind up exhausted and you go on vacation for a couple weeks and you charge back up. So we have these cycles. Some of them are short, some of them are long, in which we naturally take energy in from outside, that's charging, or we let out the energy we have inside, that's discharging.
One of the things I really enjoyed about your book was how you explain as children, if, for example, a parent is yelling at us and there's a charge going through our body that is saying, fight back, stand up for yourself. And yet there's another programmed message saying, no, you better not, you'll make it worse. And how that creates a block. You say our programs direct our charge. As habits form, the program is reinforced by the charge flowing through it, creating pathways in the brain and nervous system. How does that work for people understanding what a block is in their programming, in their charge?
Yeah, so let's just take an example like that. A little child, 5 years old, is getting yelled at by a great big parent. And, if we were to put that on a scale of our adult size, the parent would be 17 feet tall. And that parent is, they're discharging. And the child is taking all that charge in their little bodies because they don't know what else to do. Now, the natural biological reaction would be to go into fight or flight. And when we are threatened by anything, when there's something coming at us, we're in a difficult situation, any kind of challenge, it brings the charge up in the body so that we have the energy to fight or run away. But a little child actually can't do that. They know the parent's bigger than them, so they can't fight them off. and they probably know that there's no place to run to, and if they try, they'll get in more trouble later. So the mind sits on the charge. It locks it up in the body, and I call that binding the charge. And when we have to do that repeatedly, then it gets bound into muscle tension. Some people have to create a larger body to hold all that charge, so they put on weight. It can be bound into freezing the emotions so we don't feel anything. It can be bound into the thoughts, so we go around and around and around in circles, but we don't really think clearly. That charge goes underground in a way, but it gets locked up underground.
Yeah, if I could just read another section of your book. You said therapists well know that merely understanding a complex isn't enough to change it. Many of the client who has come to me with a full understanding of how their brother did this to them or their mother did that, resulting in the way they are now. But the understanding is not enough to change the complex. That's because the basic charge at the core of the complex has not been diffused, discharged, or redistributed into new beliefs and emotions. To do this properly, we need to understand the principles of charging and discharging. So could you give people an idea of what that means in layman's terms? Like,
Sure.
I feel like you're talking about these core energy blocks that affect people to this day.
That's right. So, we talk about a psychological complex. People have heard of having an inferiority complex, for example. But a complex is a fusion of memories, emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and sensations. So, in other words, if you were afraid a lot when you were a child, you may have a fear complex, and that gets triggered very easily. It could get triggered by a loud noise. It could get triggered by a sudden movement. And when one part of the complex gets triggered, all the rest of them get triggered too. So in other words, those emotions get triggered, and the behavior to maybe lock up or pull away gets triggered. And that's all fused together with charge. Now, therapists can help you understand the complex and say, oh yeah, well, of course you have a fear complex. You were afraid for your safety when you were growing up, but that doesn't solve it. What we need to do is discharge the energy of the fear from the body. So all those components that are fused together, they can rearrange in a more positive configuration. So in other words, now, in fact, when you take the energy of fear, I teach people to look at their fear in a different way. Instead of something negative that they have to either overcome or block, to say, well, that's your life force. Say hello to it. Welcome it into your body. Use it to allow yourself to be energized in order to deal with life instead of lock up. But what often happens when we have a defense pattern is when the charge comes in, it reinforces the defense pattern rather than be released. So a lot of people experience that, for example, in their throat. They want to say something, but when they are about to say it, like raising their hand in a crowd or in a classroom or something, and all of a sudden all that charge comes up to their throat, and their throat locks up and it gets very tiny, and they can't quite open it because the charge is reinforcing the block, unfortunately, and then we get trapped in it. So we have to learn to discharge it from the body, and then, for example, your words can flow more easily without getting blocked by that charge that makes you nervous or scared. Does that make a little more sense that way?
It really does. And I feel like one thing your book helps people do is to find where that block is. Like you just gave the example of feeling it in your throat. Some people feel it in their stomach. What are some ways people listening to this can say, oh yeah, I do feel that physically when I public speak or when this trigger of someone picking on me is charged for me? What are some ways that people can recognize that in their own lives?
Well, the first step is to really recognize what charge is in the body, and it's some kind of activation. It sort of feels like a cup of coffee just went off in your body. And usually it creates a kind of tightening of some muscles. So we get a grip in the gut, we get butterflies in our stomach, we get a frog in our throat, our heart beats faster, our palms get sweatier. the face twitches, things like that are all signs of charge arising in the body. We might also say you get triggered. You know, we know what it's like when someone says something that triggers us, or we see something on the news that triggers us. And then we have an emotional charge going. So what I teach people to do is get away from the story of what's causing your charge and go into the body and feel, where is my charge? What is it doing? Oh, my charge is coming into my belly and it's locking up, or my charge is coming into my heart and my heart is beating, 100 times a minute, or my charge is going into my hands and they want to come into a fist. So I help my clients understand where the charge is and what it wants to do, because charge always arises for a reason. And the block is keeping that reason from being completed. Like the charge arises in your throat because once upon a time you wanted to say something very important and you couldn't. And then you blocked it, probably for a good reason back then, but now it's blocking everything. So if we realize, what does my charge want to say? Or what is my truth right now? Or if it comes into the belly, it's because the charge wants to take action. What's the action that I want to take? And allow that charge to complete in a safe way. Maybe your charge wanted to get angry and you didn't dare. Well, find a safe way to get angry, yell at a pillow or something and get that out. Then it releases it so that that block can dissolve. And then the next time charge comes in, it doesn't hit the block, it goes into your aliveness.
And then it gets healed and diffused.
Yes.
What about, you mentioned how people get stuck with their story, and I think that is such a true statement. I find that some people almost get charged by their story, and they get addicted to that charge, that feeling of, look at what happened to me.
Exactly.
Is that possible?
Oh, yeah. People do all the time. And they have a lot of charge around their story, but they keep running it in a circle. Oh, you made me do this, and it's because of you that I feel that, and this happened to me. And what they're missing is, what is the charge doing in their own body? And if we look at whatever happens to us as an invitation to experience charge in our body and heal something, then we can pull back from the story and say, okay, you might just be the messenger, but I'm going to deal with, what is this bringing up in me? What is my charge coming up? Oh, it's trying to complete, maybe you're criticizing me the way my father criticized me, and I never could overcome that. And the healing is to, have a nurturing voice on the inside that's not criticizing. That's just an example. So whatever we had as a past trauma or difficulty, we are likely to get triggered in the present time. And most people just try to make that go away. Stop talking to me that way. Stop asking me those questions, whatever. And yet it doesn't heal the charge, because they're trying to control their outer circumstance instead of meet the charge that's going on in their own body.
So it's almost like Jung's shadow work, where you need to give that wounded charge the attention it's craving.
Exactly, because it has a message for you, and it wants to flow freely and not hit the blocks. So what we want to do is feel the meeting point of the charge and the blocks. So you feel the charge come up into your throat, and you feel the muscles of your throat tighten. You're meeting the charge and the blocks. But here's the thing. When charge meets your blocks, it's very uncomfortable. And most people will say, oh, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I wouldn't be comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, or I wouldn't be comfortable being seen in a bathing suit, or I wouldn't be comfortable confronting someone. It's because they wouldn't be comfortable with the way their charge would hit their blocks. But when we dissolve the blocks, we expand our comfort zone. We have a larger range in which we can live, and we're still comfortable.
So based on your Wheels of Life and earlier work, I always correlate everything to the chakras. I have an acquaintance friend, for example, who is a true control freak. And when she can't be in control, she gets migraines. And I'm
Mm.
thinking, oh, that's, you know, that's her third eye chakra.
Yeah.
But do you feel that those are always rooted in childhood issues? Like, was there a point in her childhood where she felt out of control?
Well, I think it's likely. I would not say always, but it's
Okay.
likely that there was something earlier that set up a pattern. And the thing is, our unconscious will actually seek out the repetition of patterns so that we can heal them. And so if she felt out of control as a child, she's going to find herself in situations where she feels out of control so she can heal that. But the
Mm-hmm.
reaction that she probably has is to try to control instead of try to heal the wound.
Mm-hmm.
But it may not be
Exactly.
childhood. I mean, sometimes people go through a difficult, 10 years in their 30s or something. Um,
Exactly.
I just worked with someone that had a very, very difficult court case fighting for the custody of her children that went on for years. And she got traumatized by that. And it didn't really correlate
Mm-hmm.
to early childhood, but she got traumatized by that situation. And so that was enough to create something that was still in present time.
I enjoy in your book where you talk about activities that will charge you and activities that will discharge you. So charging activities are like finding meaning, feeling emotion, stimulating your senses. One of the things that you say is a discharging activity, working, one of them though is creativity. And I found that so interesting because I always felt that doing something creative charged me up and filled me up. But the way you describe it is absolutely perfect. Can you talk about how creating is actually a discharging activity for people?
Well, yeah, creating is actually taking something inside and putting it out. Like I'm taking my inner impulse and I'm writing a book or I'm making a painting or working in the garden. And one of the keys that it's discharging is you can't do it indefinitely without getting tired. You know, there's a point where you
Mm-hmm.
go, I have to take a break. But we can get charged up by the act of creating. It's like, oh boy, I get to make something. I really enjoy doing this. I get charged up when I get a day off and I get to be out in my garden. But it's sort of like the body's saying, oh, there's going to be a pathway open that is fun where I get to discharge and my charge is all going to come barreling up so it can come out. And so it's a very good thing. We love that feeling of aliveness. And we can only do it for so long before we get tired. And then we have to go get charged up by taking some sleep or some food or, a break or something.
But it's all part of that stimulus, charge, discharge, relaxation cycle.
Well, that's true too. That's another part of it is that, something will come along to stimulate us. Oh, somebody said something at dinner and now I've got my mind going. Or someone will see a picture of someone sexy and they get their sexual charge. And then when they engage with a topic, their charge increases. And, in the classic textbook, it will go to a certain point where they discharge. Let's say it's an argument. You mention something, someone gets annoyed, then the argument escalates, and then finally somebody just kind of blows their top and says, well, you just da 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 da, and they discharge, and then it kind of goes down the back side of the curve into some relaxation. And that's when people in an argument actually start listening to each other. They don't really listen very well when they're at the high point of charge. In fact, I say that if someone's really discharging on you, they're yelling at you or something, don't try to interrupt. You can't get anything in until they're done discharging. And only then are they ready to listen. So, a
A
yoga
really
class
good.
will follow this curve. A good therapy session will follow this curve. This curve, sexuality follows this curve. Many things in life do.
So if we compared an argument to a yoga class, would the listening come at the Shavasana stage of the class or before?
Exactly. Well,
Okay.
it's coming all during, hopefully you're listening to your body while you're doing yoga, but, yoga starts with a warm up. So you're getting your body going. It usually goes to a peak pose, the high point of the class, the most energetic point of the class. And it starts winding down, and then you end with Shavasana, the rest or relaxation. And that's a very important part in the charge cycle, because when we rest, the ego lets go. We go into a low charge state, but that is a state of deep meditation. And that's a state where things can rearrange in our psyche and in our body.
Well, Ian, you talk about a comfort zone with your charge and how some people are highly charged people naturally and some are lower charged people naturally, and how it's important to figure out where your comfort zone is. Can you talk a little bit about how people can determine their comfort zone?
Yeah, well, the comfort zone, some people they love to be full of energy. They're constantly doing things. They can't sit still. And if they go try to spend time alone or sit in meditation, they're very uncomfortable. They go, oh, I can't be that quiet. I just want to do something. And that's the edge of their comfort zone. Whereas other people are very comfortable being alone, being quiet, going into deep states of meditation. They like to relax, but they don't want to go to a loud, noisy party. That's too much for them. And they don't want to engage in things that are very confronting. That's too much for them. So they're not comfortable when their charge goes high, where someone else might be comfortable when their charge goes low. So the comfort zone is defined by our blocks. We're blocked in some way. And that's when the charge pushes up against the block. As I was saying earlier, it's very uncomfortable. But when we can move the blocks, when we can dissolve them, we can have our full charge at the high level and at the low level. And the gifts of being at the high level is you can get a lot done. You can handle a lot of complexity. Like a CEO of a large company, they need to be a person that functions at high charge. And the low level advantage is you can relax, you can rest deeply, which is renewal. You can go to very deep states of meditation and stillness. We have to be able to go to a low charge to do that. So what we want to do is widen our comfort zone so we can tolerate more at the high end and tolerate more at the low end. Then we have more room in our life.
Mm-hmm. And reading that description of, getting beyond your comfort zone almost reminded me of Edison and Da Vinci, people who had high charge moments, but then they always insisted on naps every 4 hours so they could, get decharged as well. And I think it's a goal for us to at least find a balance with that. Now, I've heard you talk about how school, just traditional school, can be a binding experience for kids because kids don't naturally want to sit still. Do you feel that sometimes that idea of binding up a charge in its extreme has anything to do with like ADD and ADHD that a lot of kids are experiencing? Or do you think that's something separate?
No, absolutely. I think there's a direct correlation. The natural expression and life force of a 6-year-old, for example, first grader, would be to be outside, would be to make lots of noise, move their body, climb trees, play with things. If you watch a 6-year-old on their own, when they're not being told what to do, they're busy discharging. They're big free flows of charge. But they go to school and they're told, sit still, be quiet, just make these little tiny movements with a pencil for hours at a time. And you get in trouble if you can't do that. Well, that's a recipe for a child having too much charge. They can't discharge. And this is especially true if they come from a family where at home there's a lot of charge flying around. Maybe there's a lot of brothers and sisters. Maybe one of the parents is yelling or emoting, and that child is taking in all that charge. They need a place to discharge it, but they go to school and they can't. So that means they can't keep their attention on anything, and they get ADD or ADHD.
That makes so much sense to me. Now, if you have this, you talk about how people want to avoid the charge that is harmful and traumatic to them. But you also emphasize how important it is to sit in that discomfort. Is it kind of like meditation? You know, when I'm telling people they need to meditate, I will often say, just start out with 1 minute of silence a day, and then grow that to 3 minutes, and then, you know, continue growing that. Do you recommend the same for people sitting in the discomfort of their charge?
Well, you know, when I say sit in the discomfort, I don't mean sit there and be uncomfortable, but I mean turn your attention to the inside. And, you know, it's not like we want to tolerate the discomfort. We want to explore it because it has a message for you. So, you know, what I tell people is say, what is uncomfortable? Oh, it's uncomfortable because I feel like I want to jump out of my skin. Or it's uncomfortable because I just feel like I'm going to burst. Okay, now we have something to work with, you know? So I'd say, well, what's a movement that might let you feel like you're jumping out of your skin without really doing that? You know, oh, well, I'd like to move my shoulders up and down or shake my hands. Well, then they're finding the body's natural way to discharge. And as they discharge, they're going to become more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Now, trauma, though, like deep-seated trauma is a different type of block, correct? It's not just, oh, my parents yelled at me, or, oh, I was stuck in school all day and I had a lot of energy. Can you speak to how trauma looks differently than what we've been talking about?
Well, trauma is a very high charge situation. You know, when something happens suddenly that threatens your emotional or physical safety, then the body will flood with charge very quickly. All we have to do, I'm sure anybody can relate to this, is they've been in a car and they've had a close call. You know, it looks like somebody was going to hit them and they missed them and they go, whoa, they're just shaking from that moment, you know, because the body in a split second flooded with charge. Now, the thing is that it floods with charge in order to take care of yourself, in order to fight off your attacker or to run away. But when we can't do that, that really high charge gets fast frozen. So it arises very quickly and it gets frozen and locked up very quickly. And that's a trauma. And then that high charge gets locked up into a particular part of the body. It might be the belly, it might be the throat, it might be, you know, the knees, it might be, you know, it could be any part of the body or any chakra, for example. And then because that high charge is so locked up, it's so uncomfortable that consciousness dissociates from it, disconnects it. And then instead of feeling that intense emotion that we might have felt in trauma, we don't feel anything. We feel numb. But we have this, you know, tension in our low back, for example, and we don't know what it is. So it's gone into the physical. Now, the difference with trauma and everyday, you know, sort of neurotic charges is that trauma is like dealing with dynamite. Because it's a really high charge situation, you have to diffuse it very, very slowly, or more like a pressure cooker. You know, there's so much pressure there on the inside with trauma. You don't just take the lid off the pressure cooker when it's full of pressure. You bleed it off until the pressure comes down, and then you can open the lid. Well, in the same way, when I'm working with trauma survivors, I'm helping them discharge in small, discrete packets. It might be a word or a sound, or I might have them push into my hands, just to discharge in little bits at a time until the charge level comes down to their comfort zone. And then we can open everything up. But we can't open it up when it's really highly charged.
That's a great metaphor. It's a wonderful way to look at it. Now, we always read and learn from your work how the energy centers are storage areas for a lot of our emotions. Can a fairly general sort of trauma be stored in different chakras? Like, say, for example, you get abruptly fired from your job. Can the embarrassment and shame of that be stored in your solar plexus, and the financial fear be stored in your root chakra at the same time?
Sure. Yeah, and it's going to trigger whatever is there. So, you know, if you got, you know, fired suddenly, and maybe because of that, you didn't get to speak your piece. you know?
Mm.
Suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
we're in move everything out of your desk. And so that's going to get blocked in your throat chakra. Or, you didn't get to stand your ground in that. That might get blocked in your root. Or if you feel like, oh my God, I'm losing my job and I don't have anything in the savings account, then that's going to also hit your root chakra with, your past whatever around survival. So it can go in any chakra, or it could freeze your emotions, and they get all locked up and you don't know what you feel.
Now, would you talk about how there's different points on our body for discharge, like the hands, the head, the genitals? Those are the main outlets for discharging this. Well, it's not just through the chakras.
Yeah. It's not just through the chakras, though the chakras do charge and discharge. But the main pathways through the body, I would say it's out the arms and through, and the hands would be the endpoints. Those are what you're going from the core to the outside. Or you kick and run, that's your legs. Or you open your mouth and you're taking your thoughts from the inside and you're speaking them and putting them out. And then the last one, sexuality, orgasm is a discharge. Now, of course, as a therapist, I work with 3 out of those pathways. I don't work with the discharge of sexuality because it's not appropriate in that situation. But sometimes when someone is very blocked in their sexuality, you might find they talk all the time. Or, if their legs were frozen and from some traumatic situation, then, their hands move all the time. Or they talk too much. So, one part will try to discharge more if another pathway is blocked.
It's just the body is always speaking to us, and we just have to pause and listen to it.
That's right. And,
sometimes we have to look at our body, because you talk a lot about body shape.
Yeah. So there's something I talk about in the book called character structure, which is different types of body. When we're growing up, we are building our body out of what's available. So if you didn't get enough love and attention, for example, you might become the oral structure, which just didn't get enough charge, and it collapses and the shoulders are rounded and the belly comes out and the person doesn't have very much energy and everything feels like too much, unless they're getting fed by a relationship. That's one. Or someone that feels scared at a young age when they can't take care of themselves, they will contract into the core of their body, go up into their head, and they'll be tall and thin. Or someone that just sort of locks up the charge inside and folds their arms over their chest, I call that the endurer. They get very thick and dense because they hold their charge inside. So how we hold or bind our charge creates the shape of our body. And the reason it's called character structure is it's not only just structure in the body, but it's also character defenses and behaviors that we do. Like the person who's tall and thin, they live up in their head. The person who endures, they lock everything up in their 3rd chakra and their solar plexus.
And then they have that extra padding almost for protection?
Yes, exactly. Right around the middle.
Wow. That's so interesting, because you read about that a lot with empaths in particular, that they will often put on weight around that area for protection. But to see it connected to charge and energy is really interesting. I'm not tall, but I'm on the thinner side, and I do tend to live in my head. And I feel like it's safer up there.
Well, yes, that's exactly where that character type goes for safety, is up into their head. And it's interesting when you're talking about empaths, because I think empaths have a little less shielding around them, and they're more sensitive to energy. Now, the people that aren't sensitive to energy, they don't understand what empaths are feeling because it doesn't happen to them, And that empaths are really, they're sensitive to is the charge of other people, because they're like a wire that has very thin insulation. And so they're quite open. And really, it's a gift if people can see it, but it can also be uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, and there's so much in this book. I mean, you talk about the achiever and different patterns and labels that you were assigned as a child, and how to kind of discharge and work with the positive and negative aspects of that to release it and move forward. And you have so many, every chapter is filled with exercises. Could you talk a little bit about some of your favorite exercises from the book that are easy for people to do on a fairly daily basis?
Well, there's one I like for, we're in an audio program, so I can't demonstrate them so well. But actually, if you go to my website, anodeajudith.com, and go to the Charge book page, there's some videos that you can get of the exercises. But this one's called Get Off My Back. And we just sort of make a fist with our hands and bring our elbows up to shoulder height, and then just move the elbow backwards rapidly as if you were trying to punch somebody behind you with your elbow, and you just say, get off my back, get off my back. And you just do it several times with a rapid movement of your elbows toward the back, and it releases the tension on your shoulders and, basically gets things off your back, like the inner critic. It's a good thing to get off your back.
Yes. And I love your tug of war exercise. But you also have a great section in there on EFT. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that connects to charge work?
Yeah, so the people that practice energy psychology or energy medicine, a lot of them use tapping, which is tapping on various acupuncture points in the body that are easily accessible. And in the book, I show the pattern of tapping. And EFT and TFT, and there's many other things that, that stands for emotional freedom technique, I think, or thought field therapy is TFT, and there's many other ones. They are ways of combining what we're feeling with tapping. For instance, let's say you're very anxious about making a presentation at work the next day. And you have too much charge and you're jumping out of your skin and you want to bring that charge level down and you don't know what to do. And maybe it's 10 minutes before your presentation and your charge is going through the roof. You can tap on these points and make a statement like, even though I'm very anxious and nervous right now, I still love and accept myself. And there's something about that love and acceptance that evens it out. And you tap on these points, and maybe your charge is up at a level of an 8 or a 9 on a scale of 10, and you tap and it'll come down to a 5. And then you say, well, even though I have some anxiety about this presentation, I still love and accept myself. And you're tapping on this pattern of points, and your charge will come down to a 2. And you can do this in a matter of just minutes before you walk into that boardroom and make your presentation. And then what do you know? You're calm as a cucumber.
Wow, that's so great, because I always think it's so nice for people to have something physically that they can do just as a conscious and subconscious reminder of, I am in charge of my energy.
Exactly. And it doesn't need to be some long drawn out 6 months of therapy. Sometimes, and you can make a point, okay, I'm going to look at when I had to make a presentation in school and they made fun of me and maybe heal that, but you can't do that in the 10 minutes before your presentation at the board meeting. But this is something you can do very quick.
Right. There's lots of, for those of you who are like me who don't know a lot about EFT, you lay it out very easily in your book. Now, you also talk so much about relationships and the charge. Do you feel that highly charged people are attracted to lower charged people and vice versa? Is it the old story of opposites attract?
Yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I find it's a general rule. And especially the relationships that really hook, that's when there's something to learn. And the high charge person will feel more relaxed around a lower charge person. And the lower charge person will feel more, juiced up when they're around the high charge person. And that's how it starts. They feel good around each other. But later, the high charge person says, what's the matter with you? What does it take to get you off the couch? And the low charge person will go, why can't you ever sit still? You're always going, going, going. And so what initially attracts us later annoys us. But what we can learn is, oh, this person is my opposite. They're teaching me they're modeling for me another way of being.
Right. And you have a lot of good strategies for talking and communicating with, with each other in those opposite relationships. Do you think two highly charged people in a relationship is a good idea?
Well, it's just a lot to handle. It can work, but
Yeah.
they're likely to trigger each other. They're likely to have fights. And, who's going to let it get down to a nice, low, peaceful, kind of relaxed state of charge?
I agree. Now, I really enjoyed your chapter on the theories of groups and charge and some of the studies you've cited about how group energy builds, and you apply it to political speeches and rallies. And you talk about how there's this moment after this charge has erupted where people can actually connect and listen, kind of like you were saying earlier in this interview. Could you talk to our listeners about charge and group interactions?
Well, yeah, I think we really have to come to understand our charge so that we are understanding what's happening politically. Because when you have a population that has a lot of repressed charge, which is most of us, right? Most of the population has repressed charge. And someone comes along with big energy that can channel that charge into something. You can, get a crowd all excited, and that crowd can lose their mind in a way. This is what happens with riots or uprisings. Somebody suddenly says, well, I'm going to throw a brick through the window. And then the other people that are getting caught up in the group energy of that big charge that has repressed their own anger, suddenly they have an outlet for their anger and they can lose themselves in the group. They might never throw a brick through a window all by themselves, but in the group, they feel justified or they get caught up in the energy. It's crowd mentality, and it can do great damage. If you use it constructively, it can also do great good. We've had uprisings for civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and things like that that have been positive. And it takes a group energy to be seen and to be recognized. That Black Lives Matter, for example. We have these phrases and these groups that are arising. We're doing it now for gun reform. But when that charge is channeled by a political leader, it can become very dangerous.
It almost makes me think, we talk a lot on this show about energy vampires. Can someone take someone's charge, whether it's in an individual or a group setting?
Well, yes, only when we're not aware of it, though. So, I can, if I can take your charge of anger, if it's repressed in you, and I can give you a place to put it, and you can feel righteous and justified without ever really admitting that you're angry, and, I can manipulate you with that. Now, that's a negative use of the charge, but it can be done.
Don't you feel that that's what's happening in a lot of the political unrest here, is that people are misplacing their anger and projecting it onto these highly charged political issues?
Absolutely. And what it's doing is it's allowing a lot of hate to come out.
Right.
And people are committing, there have always been hate crimes, but they're committing them more and more in the open because they feel like they're given permission for it. And that, now they have a place to put their anger about their job not working out, or, not making enough money, or their wife not being happy in their marriage or something. And they channel that onto someone who's a different race or religion, and it's very dangerous.
Right. But it makes them feel empowered and safe and validated in the moment.
Exactly. Now, and it gives them an outlet for their charge.
Yes, a misplaced outlet, but nonetheless an outlet. Can we use our charge for good? Like, I look at all those studies, those studies they've done of people who, remember the one they did in Washington, D.C., where they meditated to reduce crime and crime reduced?
That's right.
Is that the same thing that we're talking about here with charge energy?
Absolutely. And that's by being conscious of it, So we can invite people, we can motivate people with their charge, right? We can motivate them to do difference. We can motivate them to stand for something instead of attack something. We can motivate them to create. A good business leader is going to want to motivate his team, to sell their product or create good software or whatever their business does. Motivational speakers are actually getting people's charge going up in a positive direction so that they can go home and do something in their life. So, with group charge, we can either inspire or we can destroy.
Right. But I think we can do that in every moment. Like if you hold the door for someone, you're sharing your positive charge of energy. If you walk on by and slam it before they can get in, you're kind of taking a little bit of their happy charge.
Exactly. I mean, you can do it as simply as just smiling at someone and really looking them in the eye and seeing them.
Yeah. And so I think one of the good things about this book is that at least it will, if people just invest in really reading and embracing this book, I really feel that people will start to not only feel and understand their energy, but understand how powerful we all are as light beings with this charge running through us.
And how powerful we become when we can actually allow ourselves to have our charge. And ultimately, what I say is harvest it, which means you don't repress it, you don't lock it up, and you don't also have to discharge it. You say, oh, I get to keep this. I get to bring it into the cells and tissues of my body for a greater feeling of aliveness and awareness and presence. And that, to me, is the essence of spiritual experience. It's an energy that we feel fully embodied and alive and awake. It's not a concept. It's not a mental thing. It's a fully embodied experience of aliveness.
Well, and that's another thing I took away from this book. Wayne Dyer has this lovely metaphor where he says that, most of us come to the ocean with a thimble, thinking that we are all limited. And we should come to the ocean with a pipeline, because it's infinite. And our energy is infinite too, if we are fully connected and balanced with the charge running through our own self.
That's right. And charge is in us and charge is around us. So we can be in a constant exchange between the inner and outside. And that way, charge is infinite. But what I would also say is charge is golden. It's like solid gold or like money. You don't want to spend it foolishly, and you don't want to lock it up in something where you can't get your investment out. You want it to flow freely and, bring you pleasures of life.
Yes, and that means giving and receiving.
That's right.
Which is back to the balance.
That's
now,
right.
I'm going to ask you a question that you're probably going to hate, so just bear with me.
That's all right.
If you could recommend one or two yoga poses that are your favorite for working with charge energy, is there one or two that you always go to?
Well, I think the yoga sun salutations are really excellent because, you're opening your body, you're expanding and contracting with every alternate move. And what expansion and contraction do, and you can do this with your hands, you open your palms and close your palms, you're going to generate charge in your hands. So when I lift my arms up and I do a little mini back bend, and then I bow forward and touch my toes, and then I take my right foot back and I lift up again, and then I take my left foot back and I close in, and then I open into a cobra. Those are all expansion and contraction. And what they do is they bring charge in to the body. They massage it, and they massage the body, and they charge up the whole tube that is running from the crown to the base.
That's exactly what I was thinking, and that's always my kind of go-to. And you're going to be teaching a yoga class workshop coming up. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah, I'm doing my chakra yoga teacher training in October at Kripalu, but I also have a 7-day intensive in August at Kripalu. Kripalu is a yoga center in Lenox, Massachusetts, and I go there several times a year. I'll also be teaching charge in the energy body on a weekend in October at Omega. and also in Ottawa, Canada, and China, but I know probably the listeners here are not going to China. So I teach all over. You can find my schedule at anodeajudith.com and a description of all my workshops. And I teach online courses as well.
There's so many online courses on there. I was telling you before we started recording, I always read your books and go back to them, but I've never really thought about going to your website because it was just like, why? Everything I need is in these books. And then I went to your website and was like, holy cow, there's so much on there. And you're very generous with your information too. There's a lot of free information on there as well. There's meditations. There's just tons of information. And so even if people can't travel to see you, although that Massachusetts area where you're going to be teaching is so breathtaking, people can still connect with you online, which I think is wonderful. Do you like the teaching, or do you like the writing, or is it both for you?
Oh, I love the teaching. I'm not crazy about the travel. That's gotten old, but I love I love the live teaching. And I'm really enjoying embracing it online too, because I get people all over the world. In fact, I have a 4-week course on charging the energy bodies starting June 12th through Embodied Philosophy. That'll be up on our website soon. Or you can go to Embodied Philosophy and get a little more detail. And on online courses, of course, you get to ask questions and participate.
Even in the online courses, that's really good to know. So that's interactive as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you thinking about incorporating some of your mythology studies into any of your future work?
Oh, I'd love to. I do incorporate it into my live workshops that have rituals as part of it. But I haven't created a workshop on the mythology itself. I did write a book on that, Global Heart Awakens, that talks about, the myths of the past and how they've guided humanity to where it is now and how we need a new myth and what that is. So a myth that will guide us in the future.
Yeah, and I just was thinking about that and thinking of the way you're a natural teacher and you put things in very easy to read and understand format. And I know you've written so many books, but I know you have so many more left in you to share.
I guess
and I think it would be, for sure. I also love your book, Creating on Purpose.
Oh yeah, that's the top down through the chakras. That's about how to create heaven on earth.
What's your favorite form of creating? Is it the writing or is it something else?
I think these days my favorite form of creating is gardening. I spend in the spring, especially every spare moment that I have creating my garden. I have a old fixer-upper property that I bought and everything was just totally destroyed, and I've been nursing it back to life. And I'm an artist. I used to paint. I don't anymore. I play piano. That's a nice creative outlet. Writing I do because I have something to say, but not because I enjoy doing it.
That's not your creative outlet. Have you ever thought about teaching at Finhorn?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, I could just picture you in those magical gardens.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, I've never
teaching
been
people
there.
to connect.
Heard about it many times.
That would be amazing. I just think that the work you have done has taught so many people, normal everyday people working in a bank to yoga teachers to, spiritual wisdom workers. And I'm so excited to see what else is coming down the road for you. I want to ask you before we close out, there's a lot of talk, especially towards the end of your book, about more the global aspect of charge and the energy body. When you look at where we are in the world, do you feel hopeful? Do you feel that there's a change coming in the charge of the planet? Do you feel that there's something the light workers listening to this show can do to add to the charge of Mother Earth?
Well, I think when I look at the world, and I look at it a lot, I read news very, very closely. I study climate change very closely. I think that humanity is headed into its cultural initiation, that we're going to have some very, very difficult times ahead, and probably a lot of population reduction. And we have to look at this as an initiation that is saying we have to live differently, and it's a spiritual initiation. It's an awakening that needs to take place. And the initiation will be as hard as our resistance is to awakening. And for those who are already on the path to awakening, that initiation may not be so difficult. For those who are really in resistance, it's going to be tough going. And I think what it's going to do, though, in the long run, I say we're moving from the love of power to the power of love. And an organizing principle based on the love of power, which is what we have now, to one that's based on the power of love, based in compassion and helping each other and cooperating. That's the only way we're going to survive.
I agree. And the only way I think we can really start to incorporate the positive aspects of that shift is by learning to work with the charge in our own body. It starts within.
It starts within. Yep.
And that's what your book is teaching people to do, to not be afraid of the negative, painful charge running through your body, and to embrace fully the positive charge running through your body, and to learn to bring it in and release it in a balance of charge and discharge.
That's right. You got it. You understand it.
Thank you. Yes. It's easy to understand the way you teach it in your book. I still have so many exercises left to do. That's what I love about all of your work. It's none of your books are books I've read and put down and put back in the bookshelf and said, well, that was really nice. Your books are ones you have to go back to. And I also find that with a lot of your prior work, I have to go back to it at different stages in my spiritual development, because I need it in different ways at different growth levels for me.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Someone will say, I picked up your book and I read it a few years ago and I was going through something and it helped me then, but now I picked it up again and I see it on a whole different level.
Exactly. And I think that's the same way that I'm going to be with this book, Charge in the Energy Body. We really hope that you all pick up a copy yourself, and please go check out her website. We will link you up to all of it on our Facebook page so that you can see her work and all the wonderful workshops that she has coming up. Thank you so much for coming on our show. It's been an honor and just a long-awaited joy for me to be able to talk to you and just have a moment to share with you how much your life's work has meant to me and has helped me on my journey.
Oh, thank you, Samantha. That really touches my heart. Well, may the charge be with you.
Yes, I love that. It's a great way to end. Thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, don't forget to show up, do great work, and share your light. Take care, everyone.